Love podcasts, hate nonsense. The Politics Show podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, Ollie. Good morning, Ava.
Good morning, Ava.
Good morning.
How do?
Well, congratulations to Bonnie Blue.
Over the moon for you. Over the moon for you.
Do you think they're going to split parental support?
What, all of the 1,000 men?
Getting points.
Would you want to be the father and be entitled to her earnings? Or would you
Are you
not
entitled
want
to
to
her
be...
earnings as the father?
If you look after the kid, you get some child support.
But, yeah.
She's presumably too big. Like, if you're shagging 1,000 men in a day, how do you look after a child?
Yeah, but she doesn't work every day, does she?
No, it's once in a blue moon there. A Bonnie blue moon.
There have been some really good memes.
It has been good.
Yeah.
I don't believe it's true.
I don't believe it's true either.
Do you know who has a really profound insight on... You know how Twitter is very skewed against like female sex workers at the moment? And there's that podcast. What's that guy called? Do you know who does he always brings like a group of women in.
Oh, there's like 10 of them all on the podcast at the same time.
Yeah, and he'll just sit there being like, and you know, you have a uterus, so therefore you're not as good as me. And you know.
I don't actually know what it's called, but I know exactly what you mean. It's like the colour scheme is like black and white.
Yeah.
I've never seen this.
It's Americans.
So Olivia and Lily Phillips was on it the other day.
Right.
By the way,
did she do?
it's actually so... No. I actually think she did really well because I think that the English sort of like sense of humour and also like rationale, an American can never compete. Like they just can't. He's like throwing these questions at her and she's like, yeah, they're going to be in every hole. And,
Oh my God.
And I make money doing it. You know, it just doesn't work. Anyway, Olivia Attwood had this very perceptive TikTok that I saw yesterday where she basically was talking about how these men hate you. She was like, I'm appealing to women who might think that sex work is beneath them because of what these men are saying. Don't. Like, men only feel this way now about sex workers. They didn't mind before where they could go on like FAP to like a video in peace. But now that women have agency and are making money off the content and becoming very wealthy, they're furious about it. Mm-hmm. I thought that was very perceptive from Olivia.
Yes. I also thought great use of FAP. I don't think we said...
I've not heard FAP.
we don't FAP real.
Sorry, I was paraphrasing.
Frat culture, no, it's good.
2015.
But I think that's... surely, I don't think misogyny towards sex workers is like a relatively new phenomenon, right?
What her explanation was, she was like, these men don't hate sex workers, these men hate women. And it's acceptable to hate sex workers because no one will counter it online. Like no one will put their head above the parapet and argue with it.
It's almost like a caste thing. Like they're the lowest of the low.
Oh, great segue.
Yeah.
Here we go. Here we go.
Would we say sex workers are English?
Yeah, are sex workers English?
Our sex was English.
If they are brown and they're Hindus and they're sex workers, are they English? That's the question we're all asking ourselves.
Did they play cricket? Did they go to Winchester? Were they the Prime Minister of this country?
Shall we play the clip first?
Yeah.
And to provide some context.
Prepare to get stupider.
Roll the clip.
Definition, right? I would say that Rishi Sunak is as English as Tizer and Wyferns, right? He is absolutely English. He was born and bred here. And I wouldn't say that the colour of his skin makes him any
He's
less.
a brown Hindu. How is he English?
Because he's born and bred here.
So by being born here, you become English, in your opinion?
Yeah.
So that's Konstantin Kisin and his friend.
I love the friend.
It's so nice that he brings him to work every day.
Have you seen, Finn versus the Internet with Jack Mate, where he's like...
Oh, with Stevie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jack Mate, a YouTuber, and his mate, and Finn's entire routine is basically saying that, like, Jack's colleague, like, is like, bring a disabled person to work day, and he's like aggressively going after him, attacking him, and I feel terrible. I think his name is Francis Foster.
Yeah.
He's like I think he's a lecturing comedian. He teaches people how to do comedy.
That guy who's on
Yeah.
trigonometry.
On his
Yeah.
riot.
No, that's what like when they are on Joe Rogan, Konstantin's friend talks to Rogan about comedy. Yeah. And then like Konstantin's being like, woke has gone too far.
We just had a conversation I was going to say in the old office, as if that's a helpful dating for the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But for us, it's quite helpful. We're talking about doing an interview with someone, and I said, "Can't we all do it?" And Ollie went, "I don't like multi-person interviewers," and I was like, "I think you just don't like trigonometry." I think that was it. And then you were like, "Oh, you're right. That's it. That's it."
He always looks so like he looks like he's not sure where he is. Like,
Yeah. Or what the conversation is that's going on. I mean, to be fair, in the context of this conversation, I don't blame him for looking a little at sea.
He doesn't seem to get it.
at sea, because that's how they get here.
It is quite funny, just like Fraser Nelson, like almost alarm at the conversation. He is like, "What are you talking about?"
But
like, it's so foreign to Nelson. Nelson's like a right-wing guy, but that's so alien to his sensibilities.
We edited The Spectator for,
a long time.
He oversaw the publication of one of the greatest articles of all time. What was it?
I got horny.
Yeah.
I got horny watching a lecture, then went to a prostitute. The man's a visionary.
Yeah, in defence of the Wehrmacht. Other highlights, Tacky's column. Yeah, look, I think
Rod Liddell.
Yeah, and if you manage to appall him with your right wing talking points, it's an indicator of like where you are. No, look, I think Fraser Nelson is broadly representative of most rational British people.
The vast majority.
Which,
of people in this country.
if you pose the question of, that recent Prime Minister, would you say they were English?
Yeah. But he's a brown Hindu.
Yeah, it's like, what do you mean? The only people that have an issue with that framing are racist.
Yeah.
It's not a conversation about Boris Johnson. There's probably a more interesting conversation about Boris Johnson, who was actually born abroad.
Of course there is.
Do you know? Like
Turkish heritage.
Yeah, for sure. American. Can he be Prime Minister?
Importantly, like not born here.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
He's literally not born here.
But they don't ask about him because he's white. Do you know what I mean? And I think, we will obviously get into this whole thing. National identity is complex and it contains paradoxes and relies on like ephemera that different people would point to different things. But this, for me, the reason I want to talk about this is because it's an indication of how far the Overton window is moving or has moved about what is an acceptable question to ask or what is debatable or what is a talking point. I.e., because he's brown and Hindu, can he be English? Whereas, if I said, can that black Jew be English? People would be, what the fuck, what are you talking about, Ollie? Like, his religion has... Judaism is actually probably a slightly bad example because obviously there is that distinction between race and ethnicity. But, like, can a black Christian be English? Or, like, can so-and-so Muslim be English? Because, like, does it matter what religion they are? Does it matter what race they are? No, I don't think it probably does.
Protestantism is not even real. So...
Yeah, I mean, look, none of them are real, right?
But but it is staggering. Boris Johnson, Turkish, Lithuanian, and American. No one has ever asked for his birth certificate. Also, do you not think that we're a bit behind the times? Like the Americans were doing this with Obama, like a decade ago.
Yeah, more than
We're so downstream,
and now we're just cottoning on.
Well, but this is downstream of the Americans, right? Because I can only assume. I know that they were having the conversation on the podcast in the context of whether or not, like, England will exist, right, as a result of mass migration. But I feel the reason they're asking is Rishi Sunak because he's born in the UK. Does that make him English? Is because of the birthright debate that's happening in the States.
It legitimises those questions.
Yeah, and look, the US is an outlier in the sense that it's like if you're born here. Doesn't matter if either of your parents are Americans. If you're born here, you have citizenship. That's I think it is the only nation state that has that. We used to have it until the 80s when Thatcher got rid of it. But citizenship and ethnicity / national identity, they are different things. Like citizenship is very binary, right? And obviously national identity, and to a certain extent actually ethnicity and race, it is a spectrum. It's a sliding scale, and there isn't really like a concrete. You can't really point to anything.
What I think is interesting about the UK in that a lot of in the longer discussion on the podcast, they are talking about, or Konstantin Kisin is talking about rules or conventions of ethnicity and identity as if it's uniform in every country. And I wonder if the UK is a bit of an outlier in that there are 4 distinct national identities, but it's a civic thing, isn't it? Like we have civic nationalism in this country. No one talks about the English as like an ethnic group because it doesn't really pertain to any discussion really. Like I'm Scottish, but if I had kids here, they'd probably consider themselves English.
You can't say that anymore.
And they'd be locked up and thrown in jail.
Yeah.
I said I'd never do so because I'd never inflict a life in prison on them. But I think like that's how fluid identity is in this country, and you've got Australian heritage, you've got Italian heritage, I've got Irish heritage. No one's pointing at us and going like you're not Scottish, you're not English, you're not whatever.
Yeah,
it's a debate. It's like the language and the debate doesn't exist in this country.
I know, I love it. It's like in my name as well, and no one's ever said it.
No, you didn't say it. Be like Ava. Do you mean Ava's not English? Like,
oh no, like the Santina bit, like it's literally like it's right there. No one said anything.
But this is it, right? Is England as a formation is more than 1,000 years old. Mm-hmm. It's actually relatively unique within the global community of like my football club, Birmingham City, is about as old as Italy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the Small Heath Alliance, 1875. I think Italy gets unified in like 1860, 1861.
Yeah, but we are knocking about.
Yeah, no, you're in the European neighbourhood.
It's when we get into ethnicity, Ollie.
There are but essentially there are these.
Ethnically, we existed before that.
Yes, and there are these like nation states to the west of Europe that are kind of on the western fringes of Europe that have existed for more than 1,000 years. Some of the oldest structures still in use in the world are kind of field boundaries in England, right? So when you talk about like what is being English, there is actually sort of a pretty extensive history you can point to. You're talking like fucking that monk Bede. Is it Bede? B-E-D-E? Yeah. Who like in 700 writes an ecclesiastical history of England. That's mad.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? It's not. You can't be like, oh, being English doesn't exist or isn't a thing, because for more than 1,000 years it very definitely has been a thing.
But I think there's not been a need for a distinct English national identity because what do you even call English people? I don't know, that ethnic group has never been threatened. English people have always had England, and like it's moulded the UK. Like there's such you consider Welsh nationalism and Scottish nationalism more so because they have been subjugated or entered into the UK in some way, kind of on like along English terms.
You came on your own volition.
I said that. I just said that. I agree.
No. I meant Scotland at large.
And I said that, but like there isn't. I wonder if there's not this obsession with like Englishness as an ethnicity because there hasn't been a need to carve out. English people haven't had to fight for anything. They've just had.
That's just not true.
They've just had the land.
Yeah, right. 1066 Norman conquest. Several decades-long wars with the French. Spanish Armada.
Oh, can you want?
Yeah, but to say that like English people have never been under attack or threatened,
I meant
like Queen Elizabeth stands at Tilbury.
Sorry, on an existential level is what I mean. Like the Normans weren't looking to make you all Norman.
Well, no, they were trying to make us all Catholic.
Yeah, I mean, like
Elizabeth I was panicking so much she put a whole load of Protestants on Ireland to make sure that the Spanish didn't infiltrate.
Yeah, and actually, like the Norman yoke is kind of cited as like when you sort of medieval Dark Ages interpretations of English identity, like good old John Bull. People do talk about the Norman yoke as being like the oppressor and trying to drive out that English identity in the same way, like very definitely the Spanish, the French, Catholics at various points have all tried to like.
We were here first.
Okay, but
do you know what? I just don't think you can say. I don't think it scans to say that like English people haven't been threatened, and I appreciate you're probably saying this in the context of like empire, right?
But we're talking about the Middle Ages, and medieval times.
Okay, but
in
what about the 40s?
History.
I mean, Hitler was trying to get over here as well at one point. I don't think that. Yeah, I'm not sure that.
I'm not saying Britain has never been under attack in a literal sense.
No, that's what you were saying.
Quite bad interpretation.
Die on that hill.
What are you trying to?
I mean, there hasn't been like an existential need for someone to be like, we, the English people, are under threat on an existential level. Yeah. Englishness is at stake.
And I guess
in recent times, in the same way that you had like the unification of Italy was based on Italian identity, like the Kurds now.
Yeah,
that's like the English. There's even within Englishness, there is distinctions.
Yeah, but
Like-
I think that's because, like, essentially, this will get your back up, but like English and British are essentially interchangeable.
Yeah.
Like the English people have subsumed large parts of their identity outside of when there's sport on, and probably, I mean, when do you go back to? Pre-World War One, maybe. That very relaxed. That essentially, as the major partner within the United Kingdom and on Great Britain, that we don't need to kind of project, solidify, talk about our identity in this way because it's unsaid. But English people essentially treat being like British identity as English identity. Is essentially what it is. And because you're right, actually, the English are the largest people in Europe that don't have a sovereign nation and don't have their own parliament, right? Like the Catalans get pissed off. Fucking, what about the English, my guy? Where's our parliament?
But then there's also, if you were like, where's our parliament? It's like, Westminster.
Well, that's exactly the point.
Like,
That's exactly the point.
You do sound, there's no supporting evidence to be like, we are being subjugated. Like,
Yeah.
you've got the tools of power, my guy.
What do you think being English is?
Being
The tools of there's like I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've been thinking about how do you actually engage with this debate, because there is definitely people do feel that their sense of English identity is being taken away from them, right? And that is because the English identity is changing, and it's people don't want to change with it, right? So like the English identity definitely since Windrush, but like, it definitely predates that. The identity has changed, and it's not necessarily like a white person. It is multicultural. And it's all encompassing, and a lot of people don't want to get on board with that.
The way I would interact with that feeling, though, is to say that English identity has always changed. Like every national identity is always in a state of flux, precisely because they're so hard to define. They're so hard to, and that actually is probably part of their strength, which means that you can kind of absorb and assimilate different peoples, different cultures can join and become a part of your country. But throughout history, it's actually quite difficult to kind of pin down one thing, because if you, I don't know, what good is it talking about like queuing and a sense of decency and fair play, which you would say are probably kind of like the empire through to now sort of tenets perhaps of an English identity. People probably the things that they would say if you asked them what being English meant. But if you tried to talk to Bede about any of those things,
sacrifice.
Do you have to talk to who?
Bede, the monk who
Oh,
did.
sorry.
He wouldn't understand.
I thought that
what
was the
those things
name
are.
of the friend on trigonometry.
Hoping one child survives the winter.
And actually, I would flip my perspective, Ava, and yes, ask the question of why it is actually that now there is this reactionary element that wants to put the brakes on and try and preserve something that has always been, to a lesser or greater extent, oscillating.
Yes,
moving.
and I don't know. And I was thinking about this actually because I was thinking about Rupert Lowe at one of the Reform conferences drew on a pamphlet that George Orwell wrote about like the politics of the oh god, is it the politics of the English language or politics of English identity? It's something like that. It's like a really short little pamphlet, and he was drawing on it, and he was talking. He was like, Orwell, he was a nationalist. This is what it is to be English. And actually it's a satirical pamphlet about how like the Englishman, only all that he has is like his garden. He gets his post delivered every day, and that's his kingdom. Orwell was a patriot, but he was not a nationalist. And it made me laugh thinking how he had interpreted that pamphlet. But that's important.
Literally.
So what I mean by that is, I don't think that this country has lost patriotism. I think it has lost nationalism. I think that people are okay with saying they are English. At times they are proud to say they are English. But are they proud of the way in which the government is acting, or some of the things that England has done over the last 100 or so years? I'm not sure that they are.
Yeah.
Would you guys describe yourselves as English or British? If someone said we're like
English.
English, yeah, I always do, yeah.
I'd say I'm Scottish. So it's interesting that just wanted to check before casting aspersions or making assumptions.
Thank you. Yeah, no,
They arrest you, of course, every time, but
they do. Yeah, you can hear the police coming now. Actually, to put Ava and I in the cells for saying that out loud. It is a verbal crime and a thought crime to say you're English these days. Yeah, I wouldn't. I don't feel British in any way, shape, or form.
Really?
No.
That's interesting.
No.
I'd say I feel quite British.
Yeah, but I think that's it, right? Is like, as an English person, do you know?
Yeah.
It's the point we were making earlier that because you are kind of the major cultural, economic partner within the three, you don't really you subsume that part of your identity. It's almost unconscious. You go, I am English, but people will use British and English interchangeably to talk about where they are, where they're from, or a whole host of other things. So.
But it's, I mean, there are parts of England that you go to where you think I am culturally very different to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's interesting. that's interesting in the context of this whole Konstantin Kisin thing, because I have absolutely no doubt. This is where class enters the conversation. That a very rich white rural English person from, let's say, the borders, like touching Scotland, North Yorkshire, wherever, Cumbria, probably has more in common or would find more cultural touchstones with Rishi Sunak, the wealthy Winchester boy on the south coast, than Rishi Sunak does with the majority of people that live in Southampton. Mm. Like the working class people that live in Southampton, and that is kind of to the point, right, about national identity, is that it sort of transcends geographical place. Laura and I were talking before we started recording actually about accent and how the way you speak is often one of the first things you think about when you think about whether someone's English. We were talking about if you meet someone who tells you they're English but they have an American accent, and it transpires they sort of, I don't know, they went to like an international school or whatever. And because they have an American accent, but the second they tell you you're English or they're British or whatever, you're like, not sure.
You arrest them.
Yeah. Well, yes, exactly. Yeah.
Your accent reveals everything about you.
Yeah.
I don't think it does, actually.
Yeah, it's big. I think it's really big.
Or you can make an assumption about that person's where they're from, what class they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't agree.
Do you know?
No.
Why?
Because I think, like, with a Scottish accent, I actually think it's a quite class-less accent.
I don't think you know enough about Scottish accents or familiar with enough.
But we're talking about in the context of how we interpret accents. Mm-hmm. And so you might have an interpretation of different English accents and what class you think those people fit in. But the point that we're making at the table is that you all have an individual interpretation. I mean, obviously there is a distinction. You can tell a different Scottish accent. I can't say that, Scottish accent. But I do think broadly it is a rather classless accent. It's quite an accessible, comforting accent.
I don't know.
I also, and I don't think... I don't know about accent being linked to class. I'm not sure about that, because then I think it's pretty archaic. It's like north, working class, south, middle class.
No, I don't.
It's pretty split. Like it's
that's
like
not that's not what I'm saying. I think within like obviously within England there are these hyper localized accents to the point where, in the West Midlands where I'm from, you can tell someone from Dudley versus someone from fucking Dorridge or Wolverhampton versus Redditch. Like there are subtleties to it, and you can tell, right, for places that are tens of miles apart from each other, if that. And equally, like in those places, the way that people speak, you can infer their class background, right? Because if they have an incredibly, let's say, thick, localized accent, people will immediately make the assumption that you're of a working class background, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas if you have a clipped, I mean, obviously, if you start getting towards like fucking Queen's English, proper pronunciation, people will make the assumption that you've had a certain level of private schooling to like not have that accent. So in like a localized context, I think you can kind of make that point. Like obviously innate within all of this as well is people's personal prejudices, right? That because if I'm in the same way, right, if I'm not familiar with, I don't know, like a fucking real thick Glaswegian accent. I'm thinking about when we were in Pollock or like other places in Glasgow, and it's unless you've just been and spoken to those people, you probably actually haven't heard it that a great deal. You're from the same city as them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you only really, I think, being like it's the sort of hyper localized aspect of it that allows you to infer or understand how someone speaks and what it can kind of say about them. But then obviously when you extrapolate it out to a more national level, those prejudices that you're talking about, i.e. like northern, working class, southern, posh. Do you know what I mean? It kind of your own prejudice is also wrapped up in that kind of almost points at a truth in a way. I don't know if I'm making sense when I say that. Yeah.
Then we get onto the ethnic debate. So if you're listening to this and you're not watching it, Ollie now has a large placard with different shades of tea.
Yeah, I mean, I just found it so strange, the whole brown and Hindu thing. When he says you're brown, he's brown and he's Hindu. That the implication being that if you're of a certain racial background, you can't be English, or if you have a certain religious faith, you can't be English. I find that so strange.
You're white and Christian.
Yeah.
But it's just rhetoric that, like, it's the implication that being English is like a privilege or something that can be stripped away from you. Like, see when you go to like Tommy Robinson protests and they chant at the police like, you're not English anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, you're not, they're accusing you of being a race traitor, essentially, for not agreeing with their racist sentiment.
Yeah.
The vast majority of people in this country don't agree with the racist sentiment. And also as well, they don't object, it's all about Englishness, isn't it? But they don't object to my being there. Famously not English, but I am white.
Yeah.
So if like an English person from like of South Asian heritage was there, I think they'd get away a lot worse off than I tend to.
I think the hard right looms large over this debate, over this conversation about what English identity is, because they have it's so explicitly connected to Tommy Robinson, formerly the English Defence League. That's what leads to Emily Thornberry and her like white van man tweet. It's the St George's Cross has been.
She'll never forget that tweet.
Yeah, she will follow her around forever. Why is it? I think I might have spoken about this before on the podcast when I was at Wilderness Festival, and they were asking, "Has anyone here flown a St George's Cross, or does anyone here like own a St George's flag?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do. I would happily. I've got one." In fact, 13th of April, as of last night, 2-1 Birmingham City, Bradford. We're going to Wembley. 13th of April, I will be wearing my St George's Cross.
In what?
At Wembley.
What tournament is this?
Virtu Trophy, mate.
What's the? I'm not. This isn't a dig. What is the Virtu Trophy?
It's like it's the League Cup for Leagues 1 and 2.
Oh, brilliant!
Yeah,
excellent.
It's like a patronising dad.
I wasn't.
Be like, I'm buddy. I'm made up for you.
I like Birmingham City. My cousin works there.
Yeah, I like Birmingham City too. Anyway, the point is, I will be wearing the flag on the day, but at
So
Wilderness,
brave.
I know, so brave, so beautiful, stunning bravery.
I will be phoning the police.
At Wilderness, where the sentiment is very liberal, it's very middle class. I was the only person that put my hand up and said like they don't get uncomfortable with the St George's Cross, and the only thing I can sort of infer from that is because as a symbol, it's just a national flag. As a symbol, it has becomes very sort of inextricably connected to. Within that group of people, anyway, the politics of the hard right.
Can I ask whether this is what Konstantin was engaging in yesterday? You could knock me back. Is he actually engaging in the politics of the hard right, or is he being reactionary? Because I'm trying to work out to what end. Where does this narrative end? Like, Konstantin is someone who doesn't believe that he is ethnically English, right? He's spoken about that. I had Majid Nawaz replying to my tweet yesterday, agreeing with that sort of sentiment, about what is ethnically English. And it's like, to what end is this sort of, because it's almost an exercise in like self-deprecation or self-flagellation to be like, well, I know I'm not English. But what is the conclusion? If you decide, if the if the end of this, what is the end goal? It's very confusing to me.
Yeah, and it's quite arbitrary, I guess, because when you say like what is ethnically English, it's a mix of, at minimum, Angles, Celts, Picts, Danes, Normans. Like, how far? Where do you go back to and drop and stop and drop the line and say that is where the English begin?
Yeah.
That's what makes you ethnically English if your ancestors are of this place. I don't think it's basically arbitrary, and people drop a pin in time to where it is politically expedient for them to do so, right? Because like the story of these islands is one that has involved immigration, whether by force, Romans, Normans, refugees, Huguenots from France and others. And I don't view those people that have classical Roman heritage, I don't view as any more or less English. Do you know
They're
what I mean?
Italian.
Yeah, sorry, no, they're Italians. They are Italians. But look, I don't think it's that useful a construct, if that makes sense, beyond being like, white British. It's essentially just a way of saying you're white, isn't it?
But also the census does document that.
Yeah.
And that's so I'm confused. Konstantin is a clever man. He is.
Yeah.
And so I'm confused that this is not sort of like, I guess it is sort of baseline dog whistle politics, but to what end? Is he just is it just for clicks?
The thing for me, sorry Ed.
So, my actual interpretation of it was Konstantin's from Russia. My actual maybe generous interpretation was I actually don't think he is that abreast of how we consider ethnicity and nationality in this country. I think he was talking about it having grown up in a country where there is a more ethnic nationalism than civic nationalism, and I think he was trying to transpose that onto the British scenario, which doesn't quite scan. That's my incredibly generous interpretation of the wider
Ed's
debate.
interpretation is he's foreign, he doesn't get it.
Yeah, exactly. That. I agree with Ed. I think that's very generous to give him, because I essentially think what it is an identification of the direction in which the wind is blowing online. And fair play to Fraser Nelson for not entertaining or playing up to it at all, and just being like, the man is English. Because normal people who touch grass and and discuss affairs of state in the pub on a Friday, the idea that you would say a British Prime Minister was not at least British, but obviously we have Scots who are Prime Ministers as well, so you can't say that they're all English, but like,
And Welsh.
yeah, famously, like they would laugh you out of the room.
Yep.
And the only reason they wouldn't is because, in the case of Rishi Sunak, was because they harboured racist beliefs about whether or not a brown person can actually truly be English. For me, it is a marker of where the online right is getting to, which, anyone who uses Twitter in any meaningful way will see, the phrase phenotype appears more frequently. The sort of the base, like just entry level racism about anyone, be they Indians, be they black people. It's like, it's sort of Pandora's box is open, and it's not just happening on 4chan anymore. And for me, this clip is just more useful as a cultural marker or signifier of how previously disgusting ideas have become acceptable within the online right.
I don't think they're acceptable. I think you were right when you said they were entry level. I think it's like, it's honestly like a child in a classroom trying to get attention, and that's what they're all doing online. Because some of the things that they reply to me, I do not mean this in a victim way, but I mean, I just read them and they are actually laughable, because I just think their arguments are so fucking stupid. And I'm like, you are a grown man and you're sitting at a computer and you type that out. Like, I would never, ever want to reveal on a public platform that I was that thick. It must be so embarrassing. They must have a shame kink.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in some cases, didn't one of them get exposed as like an Indian Bitcoin scammer?
Oh, one of the big ones. It's also as well been like, it's I regret knowing about this.
I need to go and touch grass.
Like we all immediately, the three of us knew exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the audience might be like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah,
But we're so abreast of like
fucked, isn't it?
the bizarre online anonymous troll accounts,
Yeah.
Anglo-futurists, whoever.
Oh, yeah, but like there are some normal Anglo-futurists. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they're not all weird.
Dozens.
I don't know. There's like, I think some of it's quite just like neat.
Here we go.
There's people talking about like spaceports in Cornwall, you know?
Yeah, and also race science.
No, that's not fair.
John O'Gaunt, replied
Yeah.
replied to my tweet yesterday. Is it possible to be ethnically English, Ava? I'm not talking about anything to do with that. He just came in and replied that to a tweet. Then he replies, is that a yes or a no? And he thinks he's getting me. He thinks he's pigeonholed me. How stupid are you? Are you actually sitting at your computer being like, got her now. She doesn't know what ethnically English is.
When he sees you reading out his tweets on the podcast, do you think he'll...
I think probably, sadly.
Yeah.
Do you think what they mean by ethnically English, the term English actually isn't a useful word for that group? English now means something has such a distinct civically national meaning that if you want to have a discussion about the ethnic group that makes up the largest proportion of English people, does there need to be a different name to have that discussion? But also, that discussion probably, I don't think that having a discussion about those people is actually that useful.
I actually would like to go away and read what is considered ethnically English. I don't think I would actually like to go and actually read about it. Because I don't think... Sorry, I actually just... You know when you suddenly get hit by a wave of like, this doesn't matter?
No, I think... but this is the point, is before people start to talk in historical records, 600, year 600, 700, attempted Roman conquest, Julius Caesar, successful Roman conquest 100 years later. You bet England, the island, it's not useful to refer to it as England, the British Isles, even that is like, what are you talking about? Is essentially like a collection of warring kingdoms and fiefdoms that by parts raid, enslave, and attack each other for several hundred years. And they are distinct. Famously, during the successful Roman invasion, there's like the Iceni in the east, there are the Picts, there are other clans and tribes that are diverse from each other and different from each other. Now, are we going to go back? Are we saying that we have to go back to then? And if you're a Celt or if you're a Pict, do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like that's the point I'm making about picking a moment in time that's politically expedient for you and saying this is when it's English, right? Because conveniently it predates a lot of the immigration from the Commonwealth, a lot of the immigration from the Empire, because you want to be able to say it was when we were white. Like that is the subtext of it. And why is it any more valid to say that that's when English, like ethnically English, is, and not further back, not when like half of the ruling class of the country is fucking Norman French, right? Like it's just ethnicity.
Yeah, they are French, aren't they? That actually really gets my back up.
Yeah.
They're all fucking French.
No, but like, again, defining yourself in opposition, like before the Act of Union, defining yourself in opposition to the Scots, defining yourself in opposition to the French, and all the fucking Catholics on the continent, right?
Hey.
Hey, he's not well. Chill out. He's going to be listening to this to feel better. His favourite podcast.
Is it?
The PoliticsJOE
With that
podcast. He mutes that bit.
We've got to get out of here, fellas.
Yeah, we do. Danny Dyer's coming into the studio. We've got to fucking clear out.
Well, do you know what you should ask him?
What does it mean to be English?
Yeah, you could ask him that.
Sorry, is Rishi Sunak English?
I was going to say, can you ask him about that tweet he did? That was the best tweet of all time.
Which one?
I can't believe it's been so long since them slags smashed into the Twin Towers. Still does my nut in every day.
See if you're 100% genetically Celtic.
Yeah.
Your children would really benefit from an injection of some other genes, I reckon.
Just a a morsel of race mixing, please, sir.
And a better diet.
Yeah.
Have you seen that about like all of the studies about like South Asians when they live in America, they're like significantly taller than if they grew up.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because of the diet change.
That's interesting.
Anyway, we could get into more ethno.
Yeah.
Ethno-nationalism.
Next week, eugenics.
Yes.
We'll measure each other's skulls.
I think we should get some calipers and put them out there. A pleasure to talk to you both about what it means to be English.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Good to get an outsider's perspective.
Police are outside.
Better go.
Thank you, everyone,
Both
for
and the
listening.
rest. Yes, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.